Welcome back to Nerf Rewired. Today we're going to be rewiring the Prometheus. Prometheus is a fantastic blaster. It's very minigun-esque. There may be some cosmetic work that goes into it. Obviously I'm going to paint the white orange. For this particular one, I've got another one that I'm keeping stock for Jared's Epic Nerf Battle. But this one, I'm hoping to do a little cosmetic work too. We will see what all I get up to for this. For this will just be the rewiring, but the cosmetics will happen later. We're going to rewire it for 3S LiPo, so I'm going to be building an additional battery housing of some kind, probably just out of some ABS pipe, so it still has a similar look, but we'll house a LiPo instead. But for now, let's do the wiring. Let's get this thing open. This could be interesting. Right, well, unlike the Nemesis, that is a really easy and pleasant blaster to get open. The only thing you should keep in mind is if you plan to mod it, don't put these on. They make it a little bit more difficult to get on and off. They're not designed to come out easily. But they can. And then once you take it apart, you can unscrew the pegs and take it apart, and then you'll be able to put them back together normally. So it'll be easy to reassemble. They just make it a little bit harder to disassemble. Alright. So, internally it is just like the Nemesis. That'll be the battery detector, because this thing actually knows when its battery is getting low and it's got a light that indicates that. That will all be getting disabled and removed because we won't be using their battery, and that thing won't know how to deal with a 3S LiPo. It'll probably just explode. So we're going to take that out. We're going to take all these boards out. We're going to get into here and take a look at what's going on in there. I want to reverse the switches. I want the top to be rev and the bottom to be fire, because I feel that it should be, which means I'm going to have to monkey with the locks in there, but I don't think that'll be too difficult. Now this whole housing is interesting. I was slightly tempted to gut the original battery so that I could just use it as the housing for 3S LiPo, but I really like the idea of having two of those rechargeable batteries for the one that I will be keeping stock. So I will just make myself a new housing somehow that will either be permanently attached down here, or I might make it removable. I don't know yet. I'll need to make a trip to a hardware store and look at materials for how I'm going to do that. But the rest of this is all just going to come out. So let's get on with that. Might be a little tight for these larger Omron switches. So I may end up going with the smaller ones. They'll take the voltage just fine, so that's not an issue. It's really just a matter of size. Since I'm taking out the mechanical lock, I will instead be using an electric lock. So it won't rev unless you're pulling the trigger. Or it won't fire unless you're revving. Yeah, that's what I meant. Trim them down just a little bit, but I think I can get these big ones in here, and I would rather use them because I need the spring. This one has the extra spring, but this one does not, so we need the click. But let's take a look at the wiring. We are gonna just remove all of it. Alright, well that's actually remarkably easy to remove the guts from. Now, I need to rewire it. So the first step, I need to figure out which way the motors want to spin. Negatives on the outside, positives on the inside. Orange and black wire, because why not? Stop it. Alright. We'll bring you in nice and close. Alright, to test the polarity on the motors, what I'm doing is I'm using a pair of alligator clips to hook to a 9-volt battery, Putting one positive, and then I'm just touching the negative. That's a mess. And I can tell which way it's going to spin, and that is the correct direction. So the inner side needs to be the positive, and the outer side needs to be the negative. Step one. Now we need to figure out which one is negative and positive on our pusher motor. Same technique. Okay. So the lower one is the negative. And the negatives are just going to get connected up. So we are going to connect to the negative here. Run along to the negative here. Okay, so that's all the wiring we can do on this by itself. From here, we need to either be going to the battery connection or we need to be going to the switches in the trigger housing. So we're going to work on the trigger housing next, which is going to involve some hot gluing and some dremeling and... oh, it's going to be a hot mess. Let's get into it. See, now that would be magnificent. If I could use that screw hole to do that. However, I would need to do a little bit of dremeling. Just a little bit. So we're going to do just a little bit of dremeling. So I dremeled out just enough right here to bring it level with that screw hole. Which we are then going to use to secure our switch. Let's see how well that actually works. Oh. Like I need to take off that post. Alright! We've got one switch in place. Didn't end up even needing glue, but I am going to put a little in anyway. Now let's take a look at the other one and see if we get anywhere near as lucky. I don't think we're going to. One, I am going to have to cut off the arm, which isn't a problem. You can do it with side cutters. Okay, got the little arm cut off. Now this one's almost certainly is going to need glue. I don't see... yeah, if I want to get it up in there far enough. So I'm basically going to have it right there. And I cut down these two leads just enough that it'll fit. So we need to dremel down far enough so that that switch engages. So we need to go down about a 1/4 of an inch. Lovely! Now we glue. Okay. So now we look at the switch wiring, and this is where it gets complicated, but it's the same as it is in the Hyperfire and the Nemesis and anything else. This is going to be my rev trigger. So positive is going to go into the rev trigger. Positive will go from the rev trigger to the trigger switch, and then from there to the motors. Several different ways. So there will then also be negative going into our trigger switch so that the pusher has electric braking. So the positive coming from the rev switch to the trigger switch is our electric lock, because you can't send power to the pusher motor through the pusher switch, through the fire trigger switch, unless the rev switch is pulled and sending power to it. Okay, so we are going from the COM on our rev switch to the normally open on our trigger switch. So when the rev switch is pressed, there is power going into this, there's positive going into this switch. So when you pull the trigger, positive will come out of the COM. We will then have negative going to the other side, so when the trigger isn't pulled, negative will be coming out of COM and there will be electric braking. We'll then have positive coming out, going into this switch, and positive coming off of the normally open going to the flywheel motors, and then negative to the flywheel motors, negative to the pusher motor, and there you have it. Now, we start running our long lines. Loads of room in this blaster for wiring. It's really very, very nice. And for no particular reason, we are going to do the negative line, or the variable line, in white. The variable line comes from the COM on the trigger switch. Oh, I love that bit. It reinforces the handle and is a lovely cable channel. And it's big enough for all of these wires. Alright, let's go all the way through the circuit to make sure that I got it right. We start with the negative from the battery, and that goes to the negative pole on the pusher motor, which then goes to the negative poles on the flywheel motors. It also then goes to the normally closed on our trigger switch, so that when the trigger is not pressed, the variable line, the white line, sends negative to the pusher and it halts the motor so we don't accidentally, dribble rounds into the flywheels after we've already let go. That is the whole negative line. The positive line starts with the battery and goes to the normally open on our rev switch. The COM then goes to the normally open on the trigger switch, so that when you press the rev trigger, positive power goes to this switch, so when you pull the trigger, positive comes from the white and goes to the pusher motor and makes it push. We then also go from the normally open on the trigger switch to the positive on the flywheels. So that when you pull this, positive goes all the way through, and positive goes to the switch, which then goes through. So let's test it and make sure it is in fact working. Rev. Nothing when you pull the trigger without rev. Rev, pull the trigger, and it goes. So we have successfully, correctly done our wiring. Now, always test your wiring with something like a 9 volts or a pack of AA's or something. Never test your circuit with your LiPo, because if you have something wrong, you can blow up your LiPo. And that's bad. So, the last thing we need to do is figure out the whole battery housing and wire up our XT60 connector. But that should be fairly simple. But in the meantime, we are going to work on some of the cosmetics. We're going to do some painting, and we're probably going to do some shell work. So, stay tuned for that.